Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive curated just for you. You sent us this article by Isaac Weishaupt called Liam Payne, Death, Conspiracies, Symbolism, and the Occult Music Industry.
So we're going to jump right in and see what we can make of these theories surrounding Liam Payne's death.
Yeah, it's really interesting how these alternative narratives pop up,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to celebrities. Like, there's just something about fame and tragedy that sparks people's imaginations.
Okay, so before we get too deep into these theories, I think it would be good to remind everyone about who Liam Payne was. In case anyone needs a refresher. He actually got his start pretty young, right?
Yeah, definitely. He rose to fame through X Factor in the UK back in 2010, and then he became part of One Direction. Huge success. I mean, millions of albums sold. A level of fandom that's, hard to grasp unless you're there. Yeah. And of course, we can't forget the mastermind behind every successful boy band. Simon Cowell Weishaupt focuses a lot on this connection in his article. He even brings up some Illuminati stuff like the Rockefeller Center, where One Direction had their U.S. debut, because the Rockefellers are always wrapped up in those conspiracy theories.
Right. Is that he's suggesting this whole system operating behind the scenes, and Cal's just one piece of the puzzle. And speaking of puzzles, Weishaupt found this really weird detail about Cowell's first job in the industry. Cleaning the axe from The Shining, he actually calls it predictive programming. Like pop culture is subtly hinting at future events.
Whoa, that's some serious foreshadowing if you believe that.
Mhm.
So Weishaupt is setting up this idea that there are these forces at play we might not even see. But before we get too deep into all that, let's switch gears and talk about Liam's life after One Direction. Weishaupt really hones in on his relationship with Naomi Campbell, who was much older than him, and someone who had connections to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yeah, definitely. And Weishaupt doesn't hold back. He suggests that Campbell might have been like a handler introducing Liam to this darker side of the industry.
That's intense. Makes you wonder if he was exposed to things he wasn't ready for and how that all played into his struggles. Because he was very open about his struggles with addiction and even suicidal thoughts.
Right, and Weishaupt points to that vulnerability.
Yeah.
He sees it as like a key factor in how young stars can be manipulated,
Yeah.
exploited. And this is where things get even darker. According to page 6, Liam's ex-fiancée, Maya Henry, said he actually predicted his own death, sending messages like, "I'm going to die."
Oh, wow. That's just heartbreaking. And there's another detail from Maya Henry's book that Weishaupt focuses on. It says that there was an incident where Liam chased her with an axe.
An axe. Wait, are we back to The Shining again?
You got it. Weishaupt connects this incident back to that axe Cowell cleaned all those years ago. He sees it as a direct parallel, almost like it's a sign that something sinister was going on.
Okay, even for someone who likes a good conspiracy theory, that seems like a stretch. Do we know anything else about this axe incident? Or is that all we have?
Unfortunately, Weishaupt admits he hasn't actually read the book, so we're kind of left hanging. But even without all the details, it's a pretty powerful image.
It is. It also reminds us to be careful about the information we consume online, because it's so easy for things to be taken out of context.
Okay, so we've got Liam's death, his struggles, the Naomi Campbell connection, and these shining parallels. Where do we go from here?
So this is where Weishaupt's theories take a turn for the esoteric people. He starts digging into the symbolism surrounding Liam's death, like the connection to the moon and the occult. Apparently, Liam died on a supermoon, the biggest full moon of 2024.
Okay, what's so special about a full moon?
Well, for Weishaupt, it's more than just a coincidence. He believes that events like this hold a special power in the occult world. He even points out that Matthew Perry, the actor, also died on a full moon back in October of last year.
Two celebrities dying on full moons. Is there any historical basis for those beliefs? Or is that just Weishaupt's interpretation?
Well, the idea that celestial events can impact us isn't new. Think about ancient traditions like astrology and alchemy. They were really connected to the idea that movements in the heavens could influence events on Earth. That concept of as above, so below. It's common in a lot of esoteric traditions.
So he's using some established ideas, even if the conclusions seem kind of out there. It's like he's applying these old beliefs to modern celebrity culture.
Yeah, and that leads him to some pretty wild conclusions, like suggesting that Liam's death happening on this supermoon could have been some kind of ritual sacrifice orchestrated by these unseen forces that he thinks control the entertainment industry.
Wait, hold on, sacrifice? That's a pretty heavy accusation. Does he actually have any proof of this?
Well, no, not concrete proof,
Yeah.
not in the traditional sense. He mostly relies on circumstantial evidence, like interpreting symbols and his knowledge of the occult.
So it's more about reading between the lines, finding hidden meanings. And speaking of symbols, he does bring up some interesting examples from One Direction's imagery. The all-seeing eye on their album covers, that 666 hand gesture, even the red phone booth on their Take Me Home album, which he interprets as, well, a phallic symbol.
Yeah, he's good at spotting those visual cues and fitting them into a larger narrative.
Mm,
But it's important to remember that symbols can be interpreted in different ways.
right. Just because a symbol shows up somewhere doesn't mean it's automatically part of some big conspiracy.
Exactly. Context is everything.
Okay, but even if we put aside those far-fetched occult connections, there's still this question of the dark side of the music industry. And if Liam Payne was a victim of it, we've all heard those stories about exploitation and abuse.
Of course, the music industry can be brutal, especially for young artists.
And Weishaupt really leans into that. He brings up the Keisha Die Young controversy, you remember that, where her song got pulled from radio stations after Sandy Hook because of the lyrics about dying young.
Yeah, that was a tough one. And as you can probably guess, Weishaupt sees a connection there.
He does. What kind of connection?
He suggests that the song's message might have contributed to that tragedy.
Wait, hold on. Is he actually saying that a song could cause a mass shooting? That seems like a pretty wild leap, even for a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, I agree. It feels incredibly insensitive to even bring it up in that context, and especially without any real evidence.
So what are we supposed to make of all this? Are any of these theories even worth considering, or is it just wild speculation?
Well, Weishaupt kind of leaves it up to us. He presents two perspectives: the normie view that blames Liam's death on his personal struggles, and then the truther view that sees it as part of this big conspiracy with the occult and the dark side of the music industry.
So he's saying there's the mainstream explanation and then there's his version.
Right. And even if Liam's death was just a result of his own issues, Weishaupt argues we should still examine why he had those issues in the first place. Was there abuse or manipulation within the industry?
He wants us to look beyond the surface and ask those tough questions about the systems at play.
Exactly. That's a good place to stop for now, I think.
Yeah, we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive. We've talked about Liam Payne's death, explored some pretty wild theories, and even touched on the occult and the darker side of the music industry, but there's still a lot more to unpack.
Yeah, in part two, we'll dig deeper into Weishaupt's claims, look at the evidence he uses, and explore some alternative interpretations of what happened in Liam's life.
We'll also talk about what all of this means for how we view celebrity culture and the stories we tell ourselves about the world. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with part two of this fascinating deep dive.
Welcome back. Let's pick up where we left off with Isaac Weishaupt's theories about Liam Payne's death. Specifically, that whole idea that it wasn't just some random tragedy, but something more deliberate and symbolic. Remember how both Liam and Matthew Perry died on full moons?
Yeah, that definitely stood out. Weishaupt suggests they weren't just coincidences, but evidence of some kind of ritualistic pattern. And he connects it to real occult beliefs about celestial events, right?
Exactly. The moon cycles have been linked to all sorts of mystical stuff for centuries. Weishaupt even ties in alchemy and that idea of as above, so below, suggesting a link between what happens in the cosmos and what happens down here. It's like he's saying the stars can influence events in our lives.
Okay, I get how that could be appealing to some people, especially those looking for deeper meaning. But is there any historical support for those beliefs, or is it all just Weishaupt's take on it?
Well, the concept of celestial influence is definitely ancient. Like, think about astrology. It's been around forever. People believing that the planets and stars can shape your destiny. And alchemy, too, was all about the stars and how they could affect transformation.
So he's drawing on these established esoteric traditions. Even if his conclusions might seem a bit extreme, he's taking these old ideas and applying them to modern celebrity culture.
Right. And his whole approach is about finding these hidden connections and symbolism, often in places you wouldn't expect. It's like he sees himself as this decoder, uncovering secret messages in pop culture.
That's definitely an interesting lens, even if it leads him down some weird paths. So besides the moon connection, what other symbolic evidence does he present?
He spends a lot of time dissecting One Direction's imagery.
Yeah.
He points to a bunch of symbols he thinks have occult significance, like the all-seeing eye on their album covers and photo shoots, the one from Freemasonry and all that.
Oh, yeah, the all-seeing eye, a classic conspiracy theory symbol. It represents those secret societies controlling everything. Is that what Weishaupt's suggesting, that One Direction was in on this?
He doesn't explicitly say that, but he definitely implies a connection. He sees that symbol along with things like this 666 hand gesture as proof of them being part of the Illuminati, that shadowy group that conspiracy theorists are always talking about.
Wait, the Illuminati? Isn't that a bit far-fetched? I thought that was more of a myth.
The original Illuminati was a real thing back in the 1700s, but it didn't last very long. It wasn't that big. But its reputation for secrecy has made it popular with conspiracy theorists.
So the Illuminati that Weishaupt talks about is more like this mythical idea of a powerful elite controlling everything.
Exactly. It's become like a catch-all term for any conspiracy theory about shadowy figures working in the background.
Okay, so when Weishaupt says One Direction was part of the Illuminati, he's not talking about a specific organization.
Right.
He's using it as a symbol for a larger network of power and influence.
You got it. It's like he's saying they were caught up in this system that uses symbols and rituals to control its members.
Like there's this secret language of symbols being used to manipulate us, and we're all being affected without even realizing it.
Right. And Weishaupt thinks he's the one who can decode it all.
Okay, so getting back to Liam Payne, how does all of this relate to his death?
Well, he suggests that Liam's death, happening on that supermoon, might have been a ritual sacrifice, orchestrated by these powerful figures he thinks run the industry.
Hold on a minute. A sacrifice? That's a serious claim. Does he have any proof of that?
Not really. Not hard evidence. It's more about connecting the dots, interpreting symbols, and drawing on his knowledge of the occult to create a narrative.
It seems like he's really good at creating those narratives, but that doesn't necessarily make them true.
Right. Correlation doesn't equal causation. Just because things happen at the same time or share some similarities doesn't mean they're directly related.
But even if we set aside the occult stuff, there's still the question of the dark side of the music industry and whether Liam might have been a victim of it.
Absolutely. The music industry can be a really tough place, especially for young artists.
And Weishaupt makes a point of that. He even brings up the Keisha Die Young controversy, remember, where her song was pulled from the radio after Sandy Hook because of the lyrics about dying young?
Yeah, that was rough. And Weishaupt being Weishaupt, he sees a connection there too.
Oh, really? What kind of connection?
He suggests that the song's message might have somehow contributed to that horrible event.
Wait, is he actually saying that a song could cause a mass shooting? Even for him, that's a stretch.
I know, right? And it's incredibly insensitive to the victims and their families to even imply that, and to do it without any real evidence to back it up.
It's like he's trying to force this tragedy into his narrative, even when it doesn't really fit.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like he's so focused on finding patterns that he misses the human impact of these events.
So how does he even attempt to explain this alleged connection between the song and the shooting?
He uses that idea of contagion magic again, saying that songs can have this magical energy that can influence things. He also points out that Keisha later claims she was pressured to sing that song, but she retracted that statement afterward.
So he's claiming someone forced Keisha to sing a song that would then cause a mass shooting. Who would even benefit from that? It just doesn't make sense.
I agree. It's a really convoluted and unconvincing theory. It feels like he's grasping at straws to make this real tragedy fit into his theory about occult conspiracies.
It's pretty irresponsible to even imply that without any real evidence.
It is. It's a perfect example of how conspiracy theories can be used to downplay real suffering and exploit people's pain.
So what are we supposed to take away from this? Should we just ignore everything Weishaupt says?
I think we should approach his work with a healthy dose of skepticism. Recognizing that he's a very specific worldview. We should be cautious about his tendency to cherry-pick evidence and see connections that might not be there.
But we also shouldn't ignore the questions he's raising about the music industry and the potential for exploitation and abuse.
Definitely. We need to be aware of those things, even as we enjoy listening to music and watching movies and all that.
It's a tricky balance, trying to be smart about the information we consume. Questioning everything and thinking critically, but also staying open to the possibility that there might be more to the story.
Exactly. And that's something we'll keep exploring as we delve into some more of Weishaupt's claims and see what evidence he presents.
Right, because even if some of his ideas sound crazy, there might be a kernel of truth in there somewhere. And the music industry definitely has a history of taking advantage of young artists.
We need to be aware of those dangers, even as we enjoy the entertainment it provides.
So what else from Weishaupt's theory should we look at?
Well, he brings up some pretty wild examples of what he calls synchromysticism in pop culture, like the Lady Gaga and Lena Morgana story we mentioned earlier, and the Keisha Die Young thing again, suggesting there might be a connection between the song and Sandy Hook.
Okay, that sounds pretty intense. I'm interested to hear more.
They are. And they really show how Weishaupt sees connections that most people wouldn't, and then uses those connections to create these big narratives based on coincidences and symbols. He even talks about contagion magic, this idea that objects or symbols can have a magical energy that can influence real-world events.
Contagion magic. That sounds like something out of a fantasy novel.
I know it sounds strange, but the idea has been around for a long time. It's the idea that a person's essence can be transferred to things they've touched or been associated with.
So is Weishaupt suggesting that songs, images, even celebrities themselves can have this magical power to affect things?
That's his idea. He sees pop culture as this battleground for occult forces, where they use symbols and rituals to manipulate people and control things.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. I'm not sure I believe it, but I am curious to hear more about those examples he gives.
Okay, let's dive into the Lady Gaga and Lena Morgana case. He says it's one of the most bizarre synchronicities he's ever seen.
I'm all ears. Tell me everything.
So as we mentioned, Lena Morgana was this up-and-coming singer with a style very similar to Lady Gaga. They even worked on some songs together before Morgana died back in 2008.
Right. And Weishaupt thinks it's significant that Lady Gaga became super famous right after Morgana died, like one star rising from the ashes of another.
Exactly. He points out that Lady Gaga adopted that stage name the same year Morgana died, and her first album, The Fame, was a huge hit that launched her career.
He even mentions that quote from Morgana's mother, saying that Lady Gaga holds Lena's soul. But he admits he hasn't been able to verify if it's real.
It's super important to be careful about unverified information, especially when it's about something sensitive like this.
Totally. But even if we ignore that part of the story, it's hard to deny that Lady Gaga's music sounds a lot like Lena Morgana's.
Yeah, it's definitely a weird coincidence. And Weishaupt goes beyond the music, too.
Yeah.
He sees similarities in their lives and careers.
Oh yeah, he talked about how they both dated male models and how Gaga played a vampire in American Horror Story. Hotel, a character who literally drinks people's blood to stay young and beautiful.
Right. And he even points to a scene in Gaga's paparazzi video where she gets pushed off a balcony by a male model. He sees it as this creepy echo of Morgana's death.
I can see how those details would fuel a conspiracy theory. It creates this narrative of Lady Gaga benefiting from Morgana's death, even if there's no real proof.
Exactly. And he ties it all back to his theory about the Illuminati and those occult forces controlling everything. He suggests that Gaga's rise to fame might have been planned, and that Morgana's death was a sacrifice to make it happen.
That's a big accusation to make without any evidence. It seems like he's basing a lot of this on his own interpretation of things.
He is. But that's how he works. He's all about finding patterns and connecting the dots.
So is he saying that Lady Gaga knew about this supposed conspiracy, or was she just a pawn?
He doesn't say for sure, but it seems like he thinks she was more of a pawn, like a product of the system.
That's an interesting perspective. It kind of shifts the blame away from the individual artist and puts it on the industry itself.
Right. It raises some good questions about fame, ambition, and the things people do to become successful.
It also makes you think about our role as fans. Are we part of this system too, just by watching and listening and buying into it?
Those are some deep questions. We can probably do a whole other deep dive on that. But for now, let's stick to Weishaupt's theory.
Okay, so we talked about Lady Gaga and Lena Morgana. What other examples does he give of synchromysticism and contagion magic?
Well, he spends a lot of time on the Keisha DeYoung controversy after Sandy Hook. Remember, the song was really popular, but it was pulled from a lot of radio stations because of the lyrics about dying young.
Yeah, I remember that. Some people thought the song was insensitive after the shooting, but others defended Keisha's right to express herself.
And, Weishaupt, he sees it all through the lens of his conspiracy theory. He suggests that the song's message might have somehow played a role in what happened at Sandy Hook.
Hold on a minute. Is he seriously trying to say that a song about dying young caused a mass shooting? That's a huge reach, even for him.
I agree. It's incredibly disrespectful to the victims and their families to even imply that.
It feels like he's trying to make this tragedy fit his narrative, even though it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and it's a clear example of how conspiracy theories can trivialize real tragedies and exploit people's pain.
So how does he even try to explain this supposed link between the song and the shooting?
He brings up contagion magic again, saying that songs and other media can have this magical energy that affects things. He also mentions that Keisha said she was forced to sing that song, although she later took that back.
Wait, so he's claiming that someone made Keisha sing a song that would then cause a mass shooting? Who would possibly want that? It makes no sense.
None at all. It's a messy and unconvincing theory. It seems like he's desperate to make this real-world tragedy fit into his theory about occult conspiracies.
It's just wrong to even imply a connection like that without any real proof.
Absolutely. And it's a perfect example of how conspiracy theories can downplay real suffering and exploit people's pain.
So what are we supposed to do with all this? Should we just forget about Weishaupt's theories altogether?
I think it's important to approach his work with a healthy dose of skepticism. Realizing that he sees the world in a very specific way. We should be careful about how he picks and chooses evidence and connects things that might not actually be connected.
But at the same time, we shouldn't completely dismiss the questions he's asking about the music industry and how it can be a dangerous place for young artists.
Absolutely. We should always be aware of that, even while we're enjoying all the entertainment it provides.
It's a tough balance, trying to be smart about the information we take and questioning things, but also being open to the possibility that there might be more to the story than we initially thought.
Well said. And that's a good point to pause, I think.
Okay, so we're back for the last part of our deep dive into these Liam Payne conspiracy theories. We've gone pretty deep, haven't we?
We have, yeah. It's been a wild ride through all these symbols and hidden meanings and alternative explanations. But maybe it's time to zoom out a bit. Look at the bigger picture.
Definitely. I mean, we've talked a lot about what Isaac Weishaupt thinks, but what do all these theories tell us about ourselves, about our culture, about how we deal with information these days?
That's the real question, isn't it? Because even the craziest conspiracy theories,
Yeah.
they can show us what we're afraid of, what we don't trust, and what we're looking for in a world that often feels kind of messed up.
Yeah, think about it. Weishaupt's whole theory plays on this fear of hidden agendas. Like, there are these powerful people controlling things, and the music industry, with all its fame and influence, it's an easy target for those kinds of suspicions.
Right. And it's not like the industry has a perfect track record.
Yeah.
There have been real cases of exploitation and abuse and cover-ups. So even if we don't believe in all that occult stuff, it's understandable why some people might think there's something darker going on, especially when you see young stars struggling with addiction or mental health or dying too young.
It's like those real-life events make it easier for conspiracy theories to take hold, and the internet makes it even easier for those theories to spread. Like Weishaupt's article. It mixes real events with speculation and symbolism and even a bit of fear-mongering.
Yeah, it's really important for us to be aware of that, especially these days with so much information flying around. We need to be critical thinkers, always asking questions like, who's saying this? What's their motivation? What evidence do they have? And are there other explanations that might make more sense?
It's like we have to be detectives in our own lives, constantly checking the facts and figuring out what's true and what's not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we also have to remember that these theories can actually hurt people, spreading misinformation, especially about sensitive stuff like death or abuse. It can really hurt the people involved in their families, and it can distract us from the real problems.
Right. We get so caught up in the conspiracy theory drama that we forget about the real human cost and the things that need to change.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the people who are actually responsible for those problems want. They want us to blame someone else so they can keep doing what they're doing.
So how do we deal with this? How do we handle all this information and all these conspiracy theories without getting sucked in or becoming cynical?
I think it starts with education. We need to learn how to evaluate information and be aware of our own biases. Be open to different points of view.
And remember that just because something sounds interesting or confirms what we already think doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah. We have to be willing to be wrong sometimes.
And I think we all have a responsibility to be careful about what we share online, especially if it could be harmful or misleading.
Definitely. We need to think about the consequences of what we say and do, both online and offline.
So to bring it back to Liam Payne, what can we say for sure about his death? We know he struggled with addiction and mental health. We know he died young. And we know that the music industry isn't always a kind place.
Right. After that, it's all speculation. Weishaupt's theory is interesting, but it's based on his own interpretation of things and circumstantial evidence. It's up to each person to decide what they believe.
But even if we don't buy into everything he says, I think there's a lesson here. It's a reminder to be aware of the complexities of the music industry, the potential for things to go wrong, and the importance of thinking for ourselves.
Well said. And I think that's a good place to wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explore these Liam Payne conspiracy theories. We hope it gave you something to think about and maybe made you question some of the things you hear and see.
And as always, keep exploring these ideas. Do your own research, ask questions, and stay curious.
Until next time, keep diving deep.